All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin our debate now. Just a reminder that we are going to be taking questions from the floor, but let's start our conversation. And I think let's maybe start with this question around legitimacy, because it is one of the things that was identified in our positioning paper by Professor Gumede. He says, you know, some of the key elements of a working development plan is one where there is urgency, there's political will, and there's drive. But legitimacy, of course, is going to be quite important. The broadest sectors of society need to buy in. Kolegani, your process of inclusion, would you say, was it perfect?
Well, we are a country of 52 million people. There was never going to be even a chance that we would reach everybody. And I know that's not what Neil is saying, but I think we should say that we can't, just because you disagree with certain elements of it, and then say that no, but there was no consultation. I suppose there would be people in the audience here who would say, and give their perspective on whether they feel that there was any consultation, sufficient consultation. Certainly not enough, we didn't cover everybody. So I don't think that we should delegitimize it by saying that there was no consultation to make the point that about which you disagree. I think you can make that point without necessarily claiming that there was no consultation.
I don't think that's the point that's being made, because everybody knows I've never been counted in the census, for example, but I know that I fit in the 52 million South Africans. Yes. So it's not about that, but it's a sense that when something as fundamental as this plan that's going to form or create a whole new South Africa that delivers for all, and if a key constituency feels that there are deep problems with it, how does the NPC engage with them?
Can I just cut in there? I mean, the point is, when did the diagnostic start? In 2010? 2011. We're sitting 3 years later. We've done the consultation, however imperfect, and we're now talking about implementing the plan. So in my mind, the question is the plan, however imperfectly consulted, a bad one? That's a more critical question for implementation than the consultation piece. Now, if you're saying it is so bad that it has no legitimacy, that's a different story. But I think, again, we do this as South Africans. We keep going around and around the same circle because maybe it's interesting. But actually the issue of legitimacy needs to be broader than just consultation. Does the NDP actually lack legitimacy for whatever reason?
I made the point.
Yeah, all right.
Can I come in there? It's both. It's both. You know, if you're proposing major interventions which are going to affect a critical constituency, and you're proposing a social accord which involves labor, you can't have it both ways. Either you say, look, we're going to consult you, engage with you on highly controversial proposals that we're making, and get your buy-in to the plan, or we're going to say we're going to ride roughshod over you, or we're going to manage the process in such a way that we have, you know, sort of jamborees over the web, sort of consult with a whole lot of citizens, so many thousand here. That's not how South Africa works. We're a society of organizations. We're a society in which we have structured forums for negotiation and consultation. And certainly as far as labor is concerned, that didn't happen. So that's a very bad mistake that was made in the first place, because it then means that the product that was produced reflected that lack of meaningful engagement. And it also reflected the fact that there was an attempt deliberately to manage a process, particularly from certain quarters within government, which are located on the one side of the economic spectrum that Adam was talking about, and we can name it, in particular Treasury, who were key in drafting Chapter 3 of the NDP. Deliberate process to reintroduce proposals that had been rejected previously that they knew Labour would reject. And therefore there was no possibility of driving it through a real process of consultation. So I think that we mustn't dismiss this as trivial or irrelevant. It's very, very important. If we see what's happening in the country at the moment, if you want the buy-in, if you want to unleash the productivity, the social power of your, of your society to drive a plan forward. Then the question that Professor Gumede raised in his paper of buy-in and legitimacy becomes very important. We're not saying it's the only issue, but now there is there's a problem for the NDP, and that's why we came around in a constructive spirit at the Alliance Summit to say, how do we address this problem? We're not harking back on the question of consultation. We're saying, how do we move forward, given that we're sitting with a problem now?
Right, Adam, I'll give you a chance.
So I think it's important to look at the issue of being pragmatic and executing a plan. So the question is, do we expect 52 million people to agree to a plan? No. But if you expect to have a social accord, and the principal player of a social accord, which is one of the principal players, which is Labour, says, no, we don't agree with the plan, you've got a serious problem. That's not saying there's a little bit of disagreement here. One of your major pillars of a social accord says, we're not cutting a deal. That's the dilemma you're in. The second problem is this, that I've heard this often. If you have some problems with the plan, let's proceed with the other parts. Now this is it. There's a plan and there's some things that are essential to the soul of the national development strategy. And there are other things that are peripheral to it. If you differ on the soul of the national development plan, what's the logic of engaging on the peripheral questions? And that's what people don't seem to understand. This is what the state has got to understand. There's two ways to develop a society, by the way, whether we like them or not. There's two ways. One is the authoritarian mode. You do what the South Koreans did and the Taiwanese. You lock up the trade unions, take Zwelinzima Vavi, throw him in jail.
And the chief executive.
Right? You keep a lot of them there. You make sure you have a plan. And you say to the businessman, you deliver on this thing. You don't do that. You thrown in jail too with Zwelinzima Vavi. That's the one.
No, you're not just thrown in jail.
That's the one way.
They did though.
The second, if you can't do that because you know that would risk a civil war, what you do is you have to cut a deal. And when you cut a deal, you have to have somebody prepared to cut a deal with you. You have to say, I want to put something on the table. You can't say you're wrong or we disagree with you. You have to say, okay, when you're cutting a deal, let's make a pragmatic arrangement. Speak about every example of a merger between two institutions. Take corporates. They might not like each other, but when they have to cut a deal, they cut a deal. This is the point we're involved in. We have to cut a deal. What are we in saying? We want to cut a deal, but not on your goals. Here's the deal here, please sign up. It's not going to happen. That's the problem with this. And this is where I want to end. I want to say this, where are we at the moment? If we want to execute, let's take that. Where are we? We've essentially got a backlash in the mining industry against inequality with incredible wage increases, which the mining sector will tell you is unsustainable. We've got another massive strike in the metal sector, and a whole range of corporates are telling you, we got a problem here. And what you've got the Reserve Bank saying to you is, excuse me, if we continue like this with these salary increases, we are in serious trouble. That's the backlash against inequality. What is it doing? It's creating instability. Instability is chasing away investment, and investment has compromised growth. The failure to deal with inequality has fundamentally compromised growth in the South African economy. To get out of it, you have to start there at the inequality level. What do? I'll tell you. What you do is you start off by saying, as the cabinet, look, we're going to want to moderate wage increases. I know you're not going to like that. To do that, we'll start. No increases for the cabinet for the next 3 years. Then you go to the top 40 companies on the JSE and you say, for you to survive, you take no increases for the CEOs and the executives for the next 3 years. Now you go to Labour and say, we've put our money on the table, can you be reasonable? This is what you've got, however. You've got a whole range of CEOs, ShopRite Checkers, what's his Whitey, he earned 627 million in 2011. He is going forward and saying, hey, we had a rough time last year in ShopRite Checkers. Can you help us out? That's not practical. This is when I say there's a level, people talk about ideology. And yes, there's ideology on the left. But I have never seen a group of people more ideological than CEOs in the corporate sector in South Africa. Utterly ideological, lack of pragmatism.
This is a tough
That's the issue you need.
Different debate. Lagani, do you want to respond?
Look, I think it's important to make the point that, I mean, unlike what Adam is saying, which is that you kind of come with a ready-made deal and you expect the other parties to sign, that's not what the NDP is. I think what is important to also mention is that the Commission would concede that the NDP is not perfect, but what it has done is it has asked South Africans to, firstly, as Nku was saying, define where we want to be in 2030. To a very large extent, there is a lot of agreement on the goals that we want to achieve, right? There may be issues of numbers here and there that, as Neil was saying, and I'm not saying it's a small issue about the levels of inequality and so on, but there is a clear sense that we as a country do not like where we are. We've set a goal that we want to achieve. And what we are saying is that in the process of getting to where we want to go, we need to then address the areas where we think there are inadequacies. I don't think any country has ever produced a perfect plan, firstly. Let me just make the point. Secondly, the examples that are cited in Gumeda's paper, countries that started doing national planning around the 1950s and the 1960s, today, if they pull out some of those plans, they would disown them, because they have learned over time through the process of planning itself and implementing to change, to refine plans. Plans are like that. It's not just a plan is not just a plan because it's a document. It is about how you interpret, how you refine it along the way, and that's what we are inviting South Africa to do with us as we move forward.
I'll give you a chance. Let me ask you this. From the National Planning Commission's perspective, could we implement this thing tomorrow? What do you think still needs to happen?
As I've said, the elements of it that are under implementation already. Government has set out very elaborate plans, detailed plans of how to take part of the NDP forward. So yes, there are elements that are being implemented that are going to start implementation.
Who's monitoring?
Forward. We have a Department of Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation.
Okay, can I respond to this issue of, it's an imperfect plan, let's live with it, we can learn by doing. Everyone understands the notion of learning by doing as we go along. But why should we settle for a fundamentally flawed plan? It's not an issue of an imperfect plan, a fundamentally flawed plan whose diagnosis of the problems is wrong and whose proposals to sort out the problems go in the opposite direction of where we want to be going. For example, if we believe we should have a national wage policy, which is going to reconfigure the wage structure to address these problems of huge income inequality in society, then proposing a strategy of wage repression, in other words, lowering existing wages, is completely the wrong way to go. Now, that is what the NDP proposes. Now, we argue that that is the completely wrong strategy. It's going to deepen the problems that we have, not only of inequality, but our fundamental economic problems in our society and in the region, by the way. So the question is, why should we settle not for second best, but for 10th best, when we've identified early on that there are problems which need to be addressed, and we need to address those problems now, rather than living with something because massive mistakes were made in the formulation of the plan.
From what I'm getting from you, you're not saying the entire plan is a problem. there are massive
No,
gaps in the problem?
for example,
are you
there's
saying
a-
that the
let me
entire
be
basis
concrete.
of the
Let-
problem,
let
the
me
plan
be-
is a problem?
Let me be concrete. For example, there's a chapter on human settlements, which looks at reconfiguring human settlements to deal with apartheid spatial planning. And it has some very, very good proposals, which we support. It has a proposal for a public service charter, which we support. And we could identify some of the other areas. But as I indicated in my input, and as Adam was saying, the core of your plan is about economics. It's about the economy, stupid. You know, that's what I was saying, Clinton was saying earlier. So the question isn't, you know, are there bits of the plan that we agree with? The
They're
question,
already implementing some of the plans. Here's what, this is where I'm trying to get
and this
to.
is where I've got a fundamental problem, because Kulakani was saying that already the presidency is now vetting, it's judging each department's programs
Exactly.
based on whether they're in line with the plan. The plan proposes a range of labor market interventions to amend certain labor legislation. Now, if the Department of Labor doesn't submit a plan which contains the proposals in the NDP, it is therefore out of line with the NDP, and the presidency should whip it into line. Similarly with economic development, which has particular proposals on beneficiation, which the NDP is very unenthusiastic about. The NDP is very unenthusiastic about the local procurement program. I can give a number of other areas. Adam's mentioned the industrialization program of the DTI. There are massive areas of contradiction between the NDP and other areas of government policy. So what's going to happen when the presidency is vetting all these departmental plans, which are not in line with the NDP? The official line of government is that the NDP will be taken forward through the IPAP, through the New Growth Path, through the Infrastructure Development Program, etc. This is spin. This is spin. This is fudging the fact that there are fundamental contradictions between these areas of policy. And we don't want to live with something that is actually paralyzing the country. We want something that's going to move us forward in a dynamic way. And I think that's the difference.
My issue is, has the horse not bolted? If you have departments being told, align your programs along with this plan.
Yeah.
It's happening.
That's exactly what we've been warning against since last year, because it was said that the medium-term strategic framework, which is the 5-year plan from 2014 to 2019, which hasn't been released yet, is going to be aligned to the National Development Plan. Again, the question of consultation, you know, are they going to ram the Labour amendments down Labour's throats? Are they going to ram a macroeconomic policy which we fundamentally believe is inappropriate to the country's current needs? That's fine. I mean, one of the things that Professor Gumede's thing talks about, and Adam has referred to it, is the fact that some of the more authoritarian countries drove plans from the top down. If anyone believes that can happen in South Africa, then I think they've got another thing coming.
Go, and then Adam, and then I need to take some questions from
Right.
folks.
Just want to make just a couple of points, quick ones. Development is everybody's business, and as you said, there's 52 million of us here, and we all have a stake in it. And so, and we're talking about inequality, but actually, we have, depending on the stats, you believe between 4 and 6 million people in South Africa who don't work. So to move away,
No, so it's over 7 million.
7 million people without a job. So if we imagine that the poverty issue is out of the way, then I am not sure that I get that. For me, the issue of poverty is still hugely central to the obstacles in the very immediate near term that we need to tackle. I cannot see how you tackle inequality without tackling that. So the issue of sequencing, and as I said earlier, you've got any number of really substantial problems to tackle. You can't do them all at the same time. You have to think very carefully, with your limited resources, which one do you do first? And I can't see how you get to inequality without having found a way that does not involve bloating out the welfare system even further to tackle poverty. So just to go back to the fundamentals of the plan that is in front of us, and I think it is something that any number of us here can go out and point examples to. Secondly, with due respect to organized labor, COSATU has 1 million members, if that.
2.2. That's
2.2 million.
2.2 million paid.
So the factor,
2.2 million paid up.
Paid
members.
up members.
okay, 2.2. So the factor by which I reduced the COSATU numbers, you have to reduce the CO pay because it was also inflated. So anyway, so 2 million people. So while particularly for business, it's probably the most important constituent of the government. For broader South Africa Inc., there needs to be a balance between business, between organized labor, and the society at large. And so the question that's not coming through here is what is it that is good for that third one? We're now very, very busy talking about what would be good for COSATU, frankly, but there are larger issues of development that are not being tackled. And the NDP focuses on those issues.
Adam?
So this is the problem. So let's take that. If we deal with poverty, we have to have growth in the economy. Is that agreeable? To have growth in the economy, you need to attract investment. To attract investment, you need a level of labor stability. And at the moment, you've got a major backlash by labor because precisely inequality levels have gone crazy. So the problem is, even if you deal with poverty, let's say we took the 7 million people, miraculously gave them jobs, you still would have the mining sector in a crisis, the metal sector in a crisis, the investment won't be coming through, the rating agencies will be hammering you, growth in the economy is threatened, and you're not going to get the resources flowing to address that challenge. Now, does it mean we have to deal with poverty? Yes. But how you deal with poverty is as fundamental. And you need to deal with poverty in a way that brings down inequality. The way the Brazilians did it. They had the Bolsa Familia grant, which we have is a social wage. We also have a grant. What they then did is they took their development finance institutions and pulled large amounts of money into the informal sector and formalized the informal sector, which means employment went up with small businesses, but the guys at the bottom grew faster than the guys at the top. That dealt with poverty, but brought down inequality. One problem with it. They were able to do it because they were in a period where resources were high and they could pay for that for those investments. We didn't do that. We put R1 trillion in black economic empowerment. But we didn't deal with small business development in the same way. They brought down economic inequalities in 10 years. We didn't. That's the big difference in how you deal with this particular poverty and inequality. For me, that's the fundamental question that we need to deal with. Otherwise, we are in serious, serious trouble.
And the single most important instrument that the Brazilians used to deal with poverty was raising the level of the national minimum wage. They raised the level. They dealt with working poverty in Brazil, and at the same time created jobs on a large scale through creating demand and using their development bank through their industrial policy. So your question is that's precisely the point, is that it's not about extending social welfare. It's about addressing working poverty as the most effective way to deal with broader poverty in society, bringing more people into the labor market at the same time as raising the level of poverty wages in society. And that's what the Brazilians did. The figures are there to prove it.